little girls who lived near Charleston, West Virginia. Gaithy Barnett and her sister Marie were sent home with their cousins from Slip Hill Grade School because they would not join their classmates in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
The West Virginia Board of Education had required that all school children salute the flag. This was a time right after the World War II began. There was great patriotism. And West Virginia School Board felt that every child should show this patriotism in the morning.
Noncompliance meant parents could face imprisonment or lose custody of their children. When Hayden Covington, a lawyer at the Jehovah's Witness headquarters in New York, got wind of the case, he seized the opportunity to challenge the Gobitis ruling. By the time West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett reached the Supreme Court, public sentiment towards the witnesses had changed, and so had the court.
My father was raised as a Baptist in southern Texas, and he talks about when he was very young, 11 years old, I believe 11 or 12, young man, going to church and hearing the preacher talk about hellfire. And he said that even at a very young age, he was asking himself, this is not justice. You don't burn forever and ever and ever for sins you've committed for maybe a few years, or even 5 or 10 years, or 60 years. He said, this doesn't make sense. This is not the kind of God I'm going to worship. I want nothing to do with this. So he left off having anything to do with that particular religion when he was young, which he told us later. And then when he was going to law school in San Antonio, living there, his father had been transferred to San Antonio and then was transferred out of San Antonio. He stayed in San Antonio going to school, and was put up, housed by someone that was listening to talks by Brother Rutherford and Brother Russell earlier. And he started listening and reading some of the material and saying, this makes sense, because he was someone that logic appealed to him, justice appealed to him. Injustice, obviously, was something that even at a young age repulsed him. And he was drawn to that and began to, on his own, study and read. And the gentleman's name that he lived with, I've forgotten, but it's in an interview that he did that I have on tape. The night before he died, he was interviewed by coincidence, because he died suddenly and unexpectedly. Wow. In 1978. But that is how he became interested. He got baptized. He also found a lot of opposition from his father. So 4th generation was on my mom's side. On my father's side, he and then his mother became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But when he made a firm stand for what he was learning, his father was quite angry because he wanted him to have a future in politics. And he didn't want to pursue politics. He wanted to work for the society, and civil rights type of law is what he went into, obviously after he left what he was doing, which was a different kind of law he was practicing in San Antonio in Texas. He was working with a political office at one point, and then with a private firm doing insurance type related legal cases, liens and something else that I can't remember right now. And his father took a gun to his head and said, if you don't give up this blankety blank religion, I'm going to blow your brains out. And he said, my father said to his grandfather, who I never met, go ahead if you've got the guts. So he didn't do it, thank goodness, because I'm here as a result. Otherwise I wouldn't be here telling the story. But his father was a Texas Ranger with quite a explosive temper, apparently.
How did he get connected to the legal community within Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower Society? How did they connect?
Well, Brother Rutherford, who had stood in at times for a judge and thus became called Judge Rutherford, had come down to Texas for a meeting about some of the cases in the mid-30s. And I don't know if it was 38 or 39, and he went over to meet with him. I believe it was in Houston. And after that meeting, there was a problem, and the society's lawyer that had been working on some cases, Moyle, had left, and Rutherford sent him a telegram and said, "I need you, can you come up?" And he said, immediately I packed up and left, and gave his cases that he was working on to a couple dozen law clerks, or clerks that were other lawyers that had to divide them up because he left so quickly, and then began working with Brother Rutherford, J.F. Rutherford, on the defense, not just of the United States, but also ended up traveling to other countries regarding some cases that had come up, such as the Philippines and Japan. And
Did he talk about Brother Rutherford, Judge Rutherford?
oh yes, called him Pap.
Did he?
Yes,
How would
like
he
his
describe
father.
him?
He said he was someone who had a strong personality, eloquence, and what was it he said? Also, he could flare up from time to time. But they had a lot in common, I think, because they were both not afraid by nature, not fearful. And so personality-wise, I think they did have a lot of complementary. He also said he had a really good sense of humor. My dad had a good sense of humor. He had been through quite a bit of hardship. Judge Rutherford, his father, had been very demanding of him when he first started. As a young man, before he ever had anything to do with Jehovah's Witnesses, he had his father wanted him to stay on his farm and work with him because he had a farm, and he wanted to go to law school. Father didn't want him to go to law school, wanted him to stay and work on the farm. So in order for him to go to law school, not only did he have to pay his way through college, but he also had to pay his father for a hand to do his work on the farm that he was not going to do himself, which I thought was quite interesting. Different world then than today. And so he did that. And he worked very hard through law school and was selling books. And as a book salesman, he was selling in the very bitter cold winter. And he had knocked on someone's door, a woman who had slammed the door in his face and turned him away. And he made some kind of a promise to himself that if anyone ever came selling books, because he was selling encyclopedias to help pay his way through law school and pay for the hand for his father's farm. And he said, if anyone comes to me selling books, I will never turn them away. After that door slam, he ended up getting pneumonia. He fell into a pond that wasn't quite frozen over and managed to get himself out, but got pneumonia and a collapsed lung as a result. And got better eventually, finished school, had his own practice, and then a woman came into his office and his secretary was trying, or someone in the office, the woman, I assume it was his secretary, tried to shoo the book salesman away. And it was one of Jehovah's Witnesses with some books about the Bible. And when he heard her being shooed away, he remembered his promise and said, no, invite her in here, bring her in. And she was brought into his office, and he started reading those books and was very impressed with what he read by Charles Taze Russell. And that's how Brother Rutherford became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My dad didn't talk a lot about the history, and I wish I would have drilled him and written things down as an appreciative teenager, but I wasn't. And he died when I was 17. So he did talk about the brothers being arrested for preaching. He did talk about the school cases, but at that time there wasn't as much problem until of course the Gobitis case was lost. But he wasn't one to talk about what he did. When I was maybe 14 or 15, I met a friend that lived in Cincinnati, because we lived in Cincinnati from the time I was 12 on. And he said he had met some people that had been in the elevator going up to listen to one of the court cases being fought in the Supreme Court. And he said a lot of the law clerks in the Supreme Court had heard. Now, since he had been there so many times, I guess he had a reputation, so I'm sure this probably wasn't his first time there that this would have happened, otherwise he wouldn't have a reputation. So at some point in time in one of those cases, there was a reputation for sparks flying and hot things happening in the Supreme Court, that all the law clerks that were working there would like cram into the court to want to listen, because apparently Papa wasn't afraid of the intimidating nature of the Supreme Court of the United States, from what I heard. And I know my mom went to listen once, she said, but in the early 40s, I don't know what year it was, but he remembers, he said he was on the elevator and he overheard a couple lawyers talking about my dad and said, wouldn't you know that one of the best lawyers in the United States is only making $25 a month? Because he was working for room and board, and they would get a stipend, a very small stipend. A comment from a lawyer to a lawyer, I can't say if he really had much notoriety. I know that after he left and defended, notoriety or recognition, they're different, of course. I know he had some notoriety when he defended Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali, because then he was on the news a couple times and being interviewed about that, because he got him out of jail when he was in there for the draft. I have a picture of me sitting on Muhammad Ali's lap, because they really got along and hit it off as friends, and he would always talk about the champ, you know, because they hit it off as friends. I do know that my dad was an astute lawyer, but not an astute businessman. Not a businessman. And there are different skills, right? And so he had an office in New York, and I know he told, which he ended up having to close because he couldn't support it. He said that Muhammad Ali never paid him. And so we got a cuckoo clock that was given to Muhammad Ali by the Chancellor of Germany, which we still have in my house right now. One of the few things I have left from my mom's stuff. And she said, well, we did get a cuckoo clock. Well, yes. Now, I don't know which of the cases this happened on, but he said that quite a number of times when he would begin his arguments, or when he would be arguing, he would be asking questions and listening, they'd be talking, and then Papa would begin. And on more than one occasion, Justice Frankfurter swiveled his swivel chair around so that he would be facing his back to my father as a gesture of some kind. I mean, I know if I was in the room, I would get the message that there was some displeasure with that. And I don't know why. All I know is Papa said that he had been a law professor at one time and felt maybe, of course, since he didn't talk to him about it, maybe he's just assuming that perhaps he felt like he should be instructing the rest and not being instructed or corrected by some lowly backwoods lawyer. I don't know. I can't begin to know what he was thinking. I just know that he on more than one occasion swiveled his chair around to face his back to my dad when he was doing his oral arguments. Yeah, he talked about a Justice Murphy,
Frank Murphy,
who I think had wasn't sure about some of the case, and then had one of Jehovah's Witnesses painting his portrait, which meant he had to sit for some period of time still to be continually painting, and that the person that was a painter that was one of Jehovah's Witnesses started to talk to him about the case, and had a favorable impression on Justice Murphy. And that someone made the statement and I'm probably misquoting it, that that if anyone would elevate Justice Murphy to sainthood, it would be Jehovah's Witnesses, even though he was a Catholic, an active Catholic. But he was very fair-minded, and that shouldn't really depend on your religion if you're fair-minded. No, he was just doing that work really pro bono for almost 25 years and received no salary, no. He took some cases for people. He died when he was in California helping some friends out in California that called him to come out and help them with some legal matters and legal issues that he had had, that they had had out there. So he had gone out there to help some of his friends out there, and he was staying with Maury Whittle, one of the people he was helping, in the apartment of his son when they found him dead one morning. That it was totally unexpected because he did an interview the night before and had been out with some friends to dinner the night before in '78.
As you come to an event like today where we're commemorating the 75th anniversary, your dad was the lead counsel, and you read such things as Wikipedia says, you know, where he had presented 111 petitions and appeals to the Supreme Court, won more than 80% of the 44 cases he brought before the court involving compulsory flag salute statutes, which we have here, public preaching, and literature distribution. What's that mean to you? And I mean, you knew your dad as a dad. And
Yeah.
Passed away when you were 17, and you're kind of learning as it's going along.
Yeah, my experiences hearing about my dad are often meeting people that he helped and them telling me personally, wow, you know, your dad did this, or let me tell you this experience, how he stood up to this judge and how this prosecutor and how he interrogated, and they're great, wonderful stories, and I think, man, what a waste I didn't have this captured somewhere, like on a video. Wow, that would have been so wonderful. I'm proud to be genetically connected to someone that had such an effect on American jurisprudence, really. It's something that, of course, any daughter would be very proud of. I didn't win these battles, the Lord did, not me. So he was very modest.
I find remarkable what you just said earlier about the number of years he represented the Watchtower Society and did it essentially pro bono.
Oh yeah, completely volunteer. It's based on a true belief that we can help people by educating, and education is the foundation of change, and hopefully more education will bring less hate in the world by those who espouse it. But that's why events like this are so wonderful, really wonderful. And opportunities to connect with history, because history, while it's the people that made it are alive, it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to have a part of, to taste and feel and touch.
Did your mom ever talk about Hayden Covington?
All the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we knew them. We knew them personally, yeah.
Okay.
And one thing I found in looking up and reading about Hayden Covington, I found out that he was on Cassius Clay's case when he was becoming Muhammad Ali, and I think that's fascinating. And I shared that with my coworkers because I work at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Well, just that he did a wonderful job, and certainly for Muhammad Ali, but he certainly did a wonderful job for my mom too, fighting for their case in the bar. You know, just bringing out what should be considered an American right, a human right.
Yeah, I remember him. He came to Charleston when there was a case. It was actually scheduled to go to court, and he was there, but it was settled before it actually trial. There was no trial actually held in Charleston for that because, like I said, it was settled before it came to trial. But he was there. Yes, yes. And but he was there. I remember seeing him there, and
so that was a settlement that brought you back to school, and that's why it's switched rather than Barnett versus West Virginia. It's West Virginia versus Barnett.
right, because they're the ones that carried it up.